The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Sarah Matthews, one of the senior staff members who had worked at the palace for over 20 years, carefully opened the mahogany jewelry box that had remained untouched for months. Inside lay the sapphire and diamond necklace, its deep blue stones catching the light like fragments of the evening sky. This particular piece had been one of Diana's favorites, a gift from the Saudi royal family that she had worn to countless state dinners and charity galas. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the necklace. The weight of it surprised her, as it always did. Not just the physical weight of the precious metals and stones, but the emotional weight of what it represented. Diana had worn this necklace on the night she had danced with John Travolta at the White House, on the evening she had confronted Charles about his affair, and during the charity auction where she had raised millions for AIDS research. The inventory of Diana's personal belongings had been a delicate matter since her tragic passing. Every item carried memories, every piece of jewelry told a story. The royal family had been careful, respectful, allowing time for grief before addressing the practical matters of her estate. William and Harry, still so young, had been given first choice of keepsakes. They had chosen photographs, letters, and a few pieces of their mother's jewelry to be held in trust until they married. But now, months later, decisions needed to be made about the remaining items. The official stance was that Diana's jewelry collection would be divided appropriately, with some pieces returning to the crown collection and others being held for her son's future wives. It was a plan that seemed reasonable on paper, clinical in its fairness. The palace had been quiet that morning when Camilla Parker Bowles arrived. Her presence still caused a stir among the staff, though they were too professional to show it. She walked with purpose through the corridors, her heels clicking against the marble floors. She had come, she said, at Charles's request to review some of the items that might be appropriate for future royal engagements. Sarah watched from the doorway as Camilla entered the room where Diana's jewelry was displayed. The atmosphere changed immediately, becoming charged with an unspoken tension. Camilla moved slowly along the display cases, her expression carefully neutral. She paused at several pieces, making notes in a small leather notebook she carried. When she reached the sapphire necklace, she stopped. Her hand moved toward the glass case and she leaned in for a closer look. This piece, she said to no one in particular, would be perfect for the Commonwealth dinner next month. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt her breath catch. The other staff members in the room exchanged quick glances. Everyone knew that particular necklace. Everyone had seen the photographs of Diana wearing it, radiant and confident, at some of her most triumphant public moments. Margaret Thompson, the palace's senior dresser, cleared her throat softly. "That piece, ma'am, has been specifically earmarked for Prince William and Prince Harry to decide upon." Camilla turned, her eyebrows slightly raised. Surely such decisions should be made with the bigger picture in mind. The boys are still so young. These pieces serve a diplomatic function. They're not simply personal trinkets. The word trinkets seemed to echo in the room. Sarah saw Margaret's jaw tighten. Diana's jewelry had never been mere trinkets. Each piece had been chosen with care, worn with purpose, and had become part of her public image and private story. "Perhaps," Camilla continued, "Charles should be consulted on this matter. After all, many of these pieces were gifts during their marriage. Technically, one might argue they belong to the Prince of Wales's collection rather than being personal effects." It was a calculated statement. Technically accurate, but emotionally tone-deaf, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Sarah knew that while some pieces had indeed been official gifts, Diana had transformed them through her wearing of them. They had become extensions of her personality, her charm, her compassion. News of Camilla's visit spread through the palace staff like wildfire. By lunchtime, whispered conversations in corridors spoke of her interest in the sapphire necklace. By afternoon, someone had discreetly informed William and Harry's protection officers. By evening, the news had reached Charles, who was at Highgrove, attending to his organic farming initiatives. Charles received the news while in his study, reviewing proposals for sustainable agriculture. His private secretary, Michael Fawcett, delivered the information carefully, knowing the delicate nature of the subject. Charles's reaction was immediate. He set down his pen and removed his reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose in a gesture his staff recognized as a sign of deep concern. "She did what?" Charles asked, though he had heard perfectly well. "Mrs. Parker Bowles expressed interest in the sapphire necklace, sir. She suggested it might be appropriate for the upcoming Commonwealth dinner." Charles stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens Diana had once helped design. Even here, at Highgrove, her presence lingered. She had chosen the placement of the roses, had insisted on the wildflower meadow that now bloomed beyond the formal gardens. "That necklace," Charles said quietly, "was worn by Diana when she attended the Welsh National Opera Gala. She was patron." "You remember?" "Yes, sir." "And when she visited the Children's Hospice in Manchester, the photographs were on every front page the next day." "I remember, sir." Charles turned from the window. "Have the car brought around. We're returning to London immediately." The drive from Highgrove to London usually took Charles 2 hours. That evening, he made it in 90 minutes. His driver noted that the prince spent most of the journey on the phone, making calls to various palace officials. His voice was calm but firm, issuing instructions that would be carried out before his arrival. At Kensington Palace, preparations were being made for an impromptu meeting. Senior staff were called back from their evening plans. The Lord Chamberlain's office was notified. Even the Queen's private secretary was informed, though Her Majesty was not to be disturbed unless absolutely necessary. The palace, which had been winding down for the evening, suddenly hummed with activity. Lights blazed in windows that were usually dark by this hour. Security was discreetly increased. Something significant was happening, though few knew exactly what. In her private apartment, Camilla received a call from Charles. Those who overheard her end of the conversation noted that her voice went from warm to cool over the course of the brief exchange. She ended the call and stood for a long moment at her window, looking out at the London skyline. Meanwhile, at Eton, William was in his study room when his housemaster knocked on the door. A call from his father was waiting. William took the phone with the wariness that had become second nature since his mother's death. Every unexpected call carried the potential for more upheaval. "William?" Charles's voice was gentle but serious. "I need to speak with you about something important. It concerns your mother's belongings." William listened as his father explained the situation. His hand tightened on the phone receiver as he heard about Camilla's interest in the necklace. He remembered that necklace. He remembered his mother fastening it around her neck before a gala, letting him and Harry touch the smooth sapphires, telling them the stones were the color of the deepest ocean. "What do you think we should do?" Charles asked his son, and William heard something in his father's voice he rarely detected. Uncertainty. "Those are Mummy's things," William said simply. "They should stay Mummy's things until Harry and I decide what to do with them." "I agree," Charles said. "I want you to know that I will make sure that happens." After ending the call with William, Charles made one more call, this time to Harry at Ludgrove School. Harry, younger and more volatile in his grief, was more direct in his response. "She can't have them," Harry said flatly. "She can't have any of Mummy's things. They're not hers. They'll never be hers." Charles heard the pain in his younger son's voice, the fierce protectiveness over his mother's memory. "They won't be, Harry. I promise you that." As night fell over London, the palace remained lit and active. Staff members who had worked there for decades would later say they had never felt such tension in the air, not since the days immediately following Diana's death. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something, though what that something was remained unclear to all but a select few. In the jewelry room, Sarah Matthews continued her inventory. She worked methodically, photographing each piece, recording its provenance, its history. When she came again to the sapphire necklace, she paused. She remembered the last time Diana had worn it, to a charity concert just weeks before her death. She had been radiant that night, laughing with supporters, comforting a young girl with cancer who had been brought to meet her. Sarah carefully closed the case and locked it. Some things, she thought, were sacred. Some memories were not meant to be overwritten. Some legacies were meant to be preserved, not appropriated. As she turned off the lights and prepared to leave for the night, she saw a figure at the end of the corridor. Charles stood there, still in his traveling clothes from Highgrove. He nodded to her, a silent acknowledgement of her vigil. "Your Royal Highness," she said, curtsying. "Sarah," he replied, "thank you for your careful stewardship. Diana always spoke highly of your discretion and loyalty." "She was a remarkable woman, sir." "Yes," Charles said quietly. "She was." He walked toward the jewelry room, and Sarah discreetly withdrew. Whatever was to happen next would happen without witnesses. The palace held its breath, waiting for the dawn and the decisions it would bring. The following morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to match the atmosphere within the palace walls. Charles had spent the night at Clarence's house, having made several more phone calls that extended well into the early hours. His staff noticed dark circles under his eyes when he appeared for breakfast, dressed impeccably, but carrying the weight of the previous day's events. At precisely 9 o'clock, Camilla arrived at Clarence's house. She had dressed carefully for this meeting, choosing a conservative navy suit that she hoped would convey seriousness and respect. Her usual confidence seemed slightly diminished as she was shown into Charles's private study. Charles stood as she entered, but did not move to embrace her as was their custom. Instead, he gestured to a chair across from his desk, creating a formal distance between them that she immediately noticed. "Charles," she began, but he raised his hand gently to stop her. "Camilla, we need to discuss yesterday's visit to Kensington Palace," he said, his voice controlled but with an undertone she recognized as disappointment. She straightened in her chair. "I was simply trying to be helpful. You mentioned that decisions needed to be made about the jewelry collection. I thought I might assist in cataloging what might be useful for future royal engagements." "The sapphire necklace," Charles said, pronouncing each word carefully, "is not just any piece of jewelry. You must understand that." Camilla's chin lifted slightly. "I understand perfectly well what it is. It's a valuable diplomatic gift that serves a purpose in royal ceremonies. It seems wasteful to have it sitting in a vault when it could be serving the crown." Charles stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Outside, the morning traffic of London continued its endless flow, oblivious to the drama unfolding within these walls. When he spoke again, his voice was softer but no less firm. "That necklace represents more than its monetary value or diplomatic function. Diana wore it when she held the hand of that young AIDS patient when such gestures were revolutionary. She wore it when she walked through the minefield in Angola, bringing world attention to the horror of landmines. She wore it the night she told me our marriage was over, standing in this very room, brave and heartbroken all at once." He turned to face her, and Camilla saw something in his expression she rarely witnessed, raw emotion barely held in check. "My sons see their mother when they look at that necklace. The British people see their princess. The charities she supported see their champion. You cannot simply claim it as if it were an unclaimed coat at a restaurant." Camilla's composure finally cracked. "And what am I supposed to do? Forever live in her shadow? Forever be compared to a ghost? I have supported you, Charles. I have endured public hatred, media persecution, and personal attacks. When do I get to be more than the other woman?" The pain in her voice was real, and Charles felt it keenly. He moved back to his desk and sat down, suddenly looking every one of his years. "You are more than that to me," he said quietly. "You know that. But this was a mistake, Camilla. You must see that." "What I see," she replied, her voice now steady again, "is that I will never be accepted, not by your staff, not by the public, and apparently not fully by you. That's not fair. Isn't it?" She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Diana has been gone for months, Charles. At some point, life must move forward." "Life has moved forward," Charles replied. "But moving forward doesn't mean erasing the past. It doesn't mean taking what was hers and making it yours. That necklace belongs to my sons, to give to their wives one day. It's their connection to their mother." A knock at the door interrupted them. Charles's private secretary entered with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir, but the Queen's private secretary is on the line. Her Majesty wishes to speak with you urgently." Charles closed his eyes briefly. Of course, his mother would have heard about this situation. Nothing remained secret for long within royal circles. "I'll take it in the drawing room," he said, then turned to Camilla. "Please wait here. This conversation isn't finished." But Camilla was already gathering her handbag. "I think it is, Charles. Quite finished." She left before he could respond, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floors. Charles watched her go, then picked up the phone to speak with his mother. The Queen's voice was characteristically calm, but Charles knew her well enough to detect the steel beneath the velvet. "Charles, I understand there has been some difficulty regarding Diana's personal effects." "Yes, Mama. I trust you will handle this situation with the delicacy it requires. The monarchy has weathered quite enough scandal. We do not need headlines about Jung Duo Diana's jewels." "Of course not. The boys must come first in this matter. Their feelings, their inheritance, their connection to their mother, everything else is secondary." "I agree completely." There was a pause, then the Queen added, "Camilla must understand that there are boundaries. Being accepted into the family does not mean claiming what was never offered." After the call ended, Charles sat alone in his study, feeling the weight of his position more acutely than he had in years. He was trapped between his love for Camilla and his duty to his sons, between his desire to move forward and his obligation to honor the past. At Kensington Palace, word of the morning's meeting spread quickly among the staff. Sarah Matthews arrived to find an unusual number of senior officials present, including representatives from the Lord Chamberlain's office and the Royal Collection Trust. A formal meeting was convened in the blue drawing room where decisions about the disposition of Diana's personal effects would be finalized. Charles arrived at precisely 11 o'clock, accompanied by his private secretary and legal counsel. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, taking his seat at the head of the long mahogany table, "we are here to establish once and for all the proper handling of the Princess of Wales's personal jewelry collection." The palace lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Royal Highness, legally speaking, the jewelry falls into several categories. There are pieces that belong to the crown, pieces that were personal gifts to the princess, and pieces that were given to her in her official capacity, but which she adapted for personal use." "I'm not interested in legal technicalities," Charles interrupted. "I'm interested in doing what's right." Margaret Thompson, the senior dresser, spoke up bravely. "If I may, sir, the princess was very clear about her wishes regarding her sons. She often spoke about which pieces she hoped to pass on to them." "Do we have any written record of these wishes?" the lawyer asked. "Not formally, sir, but she did make notes. I have her personal jewelry log, where she recorded the history of each piece and her hopes for them." Charles leaned forward. "Please share what you know, Margaret." Margaret produced a leather-bound notebook. its pages filled with Diana's distinctive handwriting. She opened it to a marked page. "The sapphire necklace, sir," she wrote, "received from Crown Prince Abdullah, 1986, worn to White House dinner, Welsh Opera Gala, birthright charity auction, for my boys to give to their wives. Let it represent love that serves others." The room fell silent. Charles felt his throat tighten. Even in planning for her jewelry, Diana had thought not of wealth or status, but of service and love. "Then that settles it," he said firmly. "Every piece mentioned in that notebook as intended for the boys will be held in trust for them. No exceptions." "And the other pieces, sir?" the lawyer asked. "Will be dealt with appropriately, with the boys consulted on any decisions. Nothing will be reassigned without their express approval." As the meeting continued, establishing protocols and safeguards, news of Charles's decisive action filtered through royal circles. At Buckingham Palace, the Queen received the update with satisfaction. Her son had shown the kind of leadership the situation required. At her private residence, Camilla sat at her writing desk, composing a letter she would never send. In it, she poured out her frustrations, her hurt, her feeling of being forever measured against a woman who had become larger in death than she had been in life. She wrote of her love for Charles, her acceptance of the complicated situation, but also her very human desire to be seen as more than an eternal second choice. When she finished writing, she read it through once, then fed it to the fire. Some thoughts were meant only for the flames. That afternoon, Charles made another trip, this time to Eton to see William in person. They walked together around the school grounds away from curious ears. "I want you to know," Charles told his son, "that your mother's things are safe. They will remain exactly where they should until you and Harry are ready to make decisions about them." William, tall for his age but still so young, nodded gravely. "Thank you, Papa." "There's something else," Charles continued. "I know this situation with Camilla is difficult for you. I don't expect you to understand or accept everything, but I need you to know that what happened yesterday was a mistake and it won't happen again." "She wanted Mummy's necklace," William said. It wasn't a question. "She made an error in judgment. People do that sometimes." William kicked at a stone on the path. "Mummy used to say that jewelry was just metal and stones until someone wore it with love. Then it became something more." Charles stopped walking, struck by his son's words. "Your mother was very wise." "She was," William agreed. Then, showing maturity beyond his years, he added, "I don't hate Camilla, Papa. I just don't want her to try to be Mummy. She can't be. No one can." "No," Charles agreed. "No one can." They continued their walk in companionable silence, father and son bound together by loss and love, and the complicated legacy of a woman who had changed the monarchy forever. Back at Kensington Palace, as the sun began to set, Sarah Matthews made one final check of the jewelry room. Everything was secure, everything in its place. The sapphire necklace lay in its case, catching the last rays of daylight. She thought about the drama of the past 2 days, the emotions stirred up, the positions taken. In the end, Charles had done the right thing. He had protected his son's inheritance and, more importantly, their memories. As she turned off the lights, Sarah reflected that some things were worth more than their material value. Some things carried the weight of history, of love, of loss. Diana's jewelry was not just a collection of valuable pieces. It was a tangible connection to a woman who had touched millions of lives. The palace settled into evening quiet. The crisis had passed, but its reverberations would be felt for years to come. Charles had drawn a line, establishing boundaries that would shape the future dynamics of the royal family. In her apartment, Camilla dined alone, contemplating her next move. She had overreached and knew it. The question now was how to recover, how to find her place in a family where the ghost of the past was as powerful as the reality of the present. At Eton, William studied for his exams, but his mind kept returning to his mother's necklace and the memory of her wearing it, laughing as she danced with him and Harry in her dressing room, the sapphires catching the light like captured starlight. The sapphire necklace remained in its case, waiting. It would wait for years until William would place it around the neck of his own bride, carrying forward Diana's legacy of love and service. But that was still in the future. For now, it was enough that it was safe, protected by a father's intervention and a family's recognition of what truly mattered. The palace held its breath no longer. The crisis had passed, leaving in its wake a clearer understanding of boundaries, respect, and the enduring power of a mother's love. Time moved forward with its inevitable march, carrying the royal family through seasons of change. The incident with the sapphire necklace became a watershed moment, though few outside the palace walls ever knew the full story. It established unspoken rules about boundaries and respect that would govern relationships for years to come. In the months that followed, Camilla withdrew from public engagements for a while, citing personal reasons. Those close to the situation understood this as a period of recalibration. She spent time at her country home, tending her garden and reflecting on the delicate balance required in her position. The roses she planted that spring bloomed with particular vigor, as if nature itself was offering a lesson in patience and gradual growth. Charles, for his part, showed a new resolve in managing the complicated dynamics of his family. He instituted regular meetings with William and Harry, ensuring their voices were heard in all matters concerning their mother's legacy. These meetings, often held over tea at Highgrove, became sacred time for the boys to share memories and feelings away from the public eye. During one such meeting, Harry surprised everyone by bringing up Camilla. "I've been thinking," he said, fiddling with his teacup. "Maybe we've all been trying too hard to keep everything separate. Mummy and Camilla, the past and the present." William looked at his younger brother with interest. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mummy's things should stay Mummy's things. But maybe we don't have to make Camilla feel like she can never be part of our lives at all." Charles felt a surge of pride at his younger son's emotional intelligence. "That's very mature of you, Harry." "Mummy would have wanted us to be kind," Harry continued, "even when it's hard." These words sparked a gradual shift in the family dynamics. While Diana's jewelry remained safely preserved for the boys, small gestures of inclusion began to appear. Camilla was invited to join family gatherings, though she was careful never to overstep. She found her own way to contribute, supporting charities that complemented rather than competed with Diana's causes. Margaret Thompson, the senior dresser, became the unofficial keeper of Diana's jewelry collection. She worked closely with William and Harry as they grew older, sharing stories about each piece. The sapphire necklace held pride of place in these sessions, its history growing richer with each telling. "Your mother wore this when she visited the Children's Hospital in December 1995, Margaret would tell them. A little girl asked if she was a real princess because of the sparkling necklace. Your mother knelt down and let the child touch it, saying that real princesses were the ones who helped others. These stories became part of the boys' inheritance, as valuable as the jewels themselves. They learned that their mother's true legacy was not in the precious metals and stones, but in how she had used her position to bring light to dark places. Years passed with their inevitable changes. William grew into a confident young man, his mother's compassion evident in his charity work. Harry developed Diana's rebellious spirit, challenging conventions while maintaining the core values she had instilled. Both boys carried their mother's memory differently, but with equal devotion. The sapphire necklace remained in the vault at Kensington Palace, waiting. Sometimes, on the anniversary of Diana's death, Sarah Matthews would take it out and clean it carefully, remembering the woman who had worn it with such grace. The palace staff had developed an almost protective attitude toward Diana's collection, seeing themselves as guardians of more than just valuable objects. Camilla, over time, found her own place within the royal structure. She developed her own signature style, her own causes, her own relationship with the British people. The shadow of the past never fully disappeared, but it softened into something more like a gentle reminder than a harsh judgment. She never again expressed interest in Diana's personal jewelry, having learned that some boundaries were sacred. On quiet evenings, Charles would sometimes stand at his window at Highgrove, looking out at the gardens where Diana's influence could still be seen. He had learned that loving someone new didn't require erasing the past. The incident with the necklace had taught him that honor and respect for what had been could coexist with hope for what might be. The royal family's approach to Diana's legacy evolved into something more nuanced than simple preservation. They established the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund, ensuring her charitable work continued. Her jewelry, when not being held for the boys, was occasionally exhibited to raise money for her causes, allowing the public to connect with their beloved princess while supporting the work she had championed. During one such exhibition, a young woman stood transfixed before the sapphire necklace. She had been one of the children Diana had comforted in the hospital years ago, now grown and working as a pediatric nurse herself. She remembered the princess letting her touch the blue stones, telling her they were magic because they helped people smile. The woman wiped away tears, understanding now that the real magic had been Diana's kindness. William, now at university, began to think more seriously about his future and the woman who might one day wear his mother's jewelry. He confided in Harry during a brother's weekend at Balmoral. "I sometimes wonder what Mummy would think of the choices we'll make," William said as they walked through the Scottish Highlands. "She'd want us to choose someone who understands that being royal is about service, not jewels," Harry replied with unusual wisdom. "The necklace, though," William continued, "when I think about giving it to someone someday, it feels like such a responsibility. It's not just a gift, it's a trust." Harry clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Then make sure you give it to someone who understands that. Someone who won't try to be Mummy, but will honor what Mummy stood for." As the years continued their passage, the story of the sapphire necklace became part of royal lore, though the details remained private. Staff members who had witnessed the events would sometimes share knowing glances when new members joined the household, a silent reminder of the importance of respecting the past while serving the present. Camilla and Charles's relationship deepened and matured, built now on a foundation of understood boundaries and mutual respect. She had found her own way to contribute to the monarchy, earning gradual acceptance through patience and genuine service. The crisis over the necklace had been painful but ultimately transformative, teaching everyone involved about the complexity of blended families and the importance of honoring all parts of their story. On a spring morning years later, William would indeed present the sapphire necklace to Catherine, his bride-to-be, along with his mother's engagement ring. He would tell her the story of the necklace, not just its happy moments, but also how his father had protected it for this very moment. Catherine would understand the weight of what she was being given, not just jewels, but a legacy of service, compassion, and the complicated love of a family that had learned to honor its past while building its future. The presentation would be private, witnessed only by Charles and Harry. Charles would see in that moment the completion of a circle, his protection of the boy's inheritance validated by William's careful choice of a woman who embodied the same values Diana had championed. "Your mother would be proud," Charles would tell his son, and for once the mention of Diana would bring only warmth, not pain. The palace that had once held its breath in tension had learned to breathe again, in rhythm with the complexities of modern royal life. The sapphire necklace had become more than a beautiful piece of jewelry or a point of conflict. It had become a symbol of how families can navigate loss and change, how boundaries can be acts of love, and how protecting the past can be a gift to the future. Sarah Matthews, now nearing retirement, would sometimes share the story with newer staff members, carefully edited to protect all involved, but clear in its message. Some things, she would say, are worth more than their material value. Some things carry the hopes and dreams of those who've gone before. Our job is to be guardians of those dreams. The incident that had threatened to divide the royal family had ultimately strengthened it, teaching lessons about respect, boundaries, and the different forms that love can take. Charles's intervention had been more than just protecting jewelry. It had been about protecting his son's connection to their mother and establishing a framework for how the family would move forward. In the end, the sapphire necklace found its perfect home, adorning a future queen who understood its significance and wore it not as a trophy but as a trust. Diana's wish that it represent love that serves others lived on, carried forward by a new generation that had learned from both the triumphs and struggles of the past. The palace no longer held its breath. It had learned to embrace the complexity of its story, understanding that true nobility lay not in erasing difficult chapters, but in learning from them. The sapphire necklace continued to sparkle at state occasions, each wearing a tribute not just to diplomatic relations, but to a mother's love, a father's protection, and a family's journey toward healing. In quiet moments, those who had lived through the crisis would reflect on how much had changed since that tense morning when Camilla had first expressed interest in Diana's necklace. What had seemed like a potential disaster had become a catalyst for growth, understanding, and ultimately, a more honest and compassionate royal family. The story of the sapphire necklace became a reminder that some boundaries are acts of love, that honoring the past and embracing the future need not be mutually exclusive, and that true leadership sometimes means protecting what others might not understand, needs protecting. Charles had shown such leadership, and in doing so, had given his sons a gift more valuable than any jewel: the knowledge that their mother's memory would always be respected, and their inheritance, both material and spiritual, would be preserved. As the sun set on another day at the palace, the sapphire necklace rested safely in its place, a silent witness to the power of love, loss, and the complicated journey of a family learning to heal. It would continue to tell its story through the generations, each adding new chapters to its history, but always carrying forward the essential truth Diana had embodied, that true royalty lies in service, compassion, and the courage to love greatly, even when that love requires difficult choices and careful boundaries. The palace had not just survived the crisis, it had been transformed by it, emerging stronger and more unified in its understanding of what truly mattered. And in that transformation lay the real magic. Not in sapphires and diamonds, but in the human capacity to protect what is precious, honor what is past, and build toward a future that respects all parts of its story.